there's cash flow to be found, right? And the property prices are also a lot more affordable. Like back when we transitioned into, because we had personally hit the financing wall and couldn't personally qualify for additional mortgages, we needed to tap into the property to qualify itself. We were faced with the option of buying it. We are really thankful now that we opted for the. So it was a little bit of an investment up front, but now we had like an additional in cash flow every single month from just having this. Those properties really self-manage themselves. That's really the experience I have there. Something that we have always done, we have thought outside the box to see how can we really increase our income. So even going back to the property in Kitchener, we just wanted to maximize cash flow. Like we didn't even know about all these strategies. We just went for the property values had risen significantly. So as we did our refinance after 5 years, we had a lot of equity in the property. And the sooner we start investing, the better off we will be. That's when we really started taking out money on HELOCs, and it just spiraled from there.
Welcome to the Wealth Through Real Estate show. Today we're joined by Stephanie Mycyk, a real estate investor and entrepreneur who has been in the industry nearly a decade. Stephanie has explored strategies like buy and hold investing, duplex conversions, house hacking, and maximizing cash flow in smaller markets. With a portfolio of 25 plus doors, she's here to share her journey, her strategies, and the lessons she's learned along the way. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Stephanie, can you share how you sort of first got started in real estate?
Yeah, it was totally by accident. I had never intended to be a landlord or investor at some point, nor would I have seen myself being in my 20s going down this road. But really what happened is that me and my now husband were living in Ontario in Kitchener, and we moved out to Calgary. So we moved out your way. And I owned a condo, and we ended up renting it out. So it was an interesting journey going from, just a regular household to having to declutter everything. And it was I turned it into a furnished rental. So luckily there was a storage locker in the basement, and I just put all my personal belongings in there, and got the condo to a point where it was presentable. And back then, I was not a realtor yet, so I got a real estate agent involved to just help me find a tenant and rent it out, and help me with the lease and the whole process. But thinking back, it's kind of crazy that I jumped to being not just a landlord, but also an out-of-province landlord, right, with the first property.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm curious though, what challenges did you face with managing that first property?
Yeah, so it was, as I said, number one would have been how to even draft up a lease agreement, right? So I was really thankful to have a professional by my side that could guide me through that process and the tenant screening, because as we all know, that's one of the most important things when it comes to rental properties. But the other thing I have to say, I was really lucky that it was a condo, because being a condo in a condo building, the management was basically taken off my hand, right? I didn't have to worry about any garbage pickup or maintenance or anything along those lines. And then it just came down to, if anything broke, I just had to find a contractor or get in touch with the condo management and coordinate for them to come into the unit and fix it. So it was just making phone calls and finding the trades, and problems usually came up when a tenant then gave notice, right? And I had a turnover. So that's when I had to fly back in. We always self-managed. And later on, though, with that same property, I had pretty good tenants. I was lucky, and I was able to figure out a way that I would screen them online, like through Zoom calls, etc. And I would just have the tenants show the unit on my behalf and also exchange the keys. So I wasn't even like physically involved anymore. So that worked for 2 or 3 tenant turnovers, and then we ended up moving back to Ontario down the road.
Okay, wow. Okay, yeah. I was curious, with the logistical hurdle and self managing. I mean, it's not impossible. I work with investors that do this all the time, but there are certain systems and things you kind of have to put in place to sort of account for being away. Now, that's a unique one, having tenants show and then just doing it over. I mean, Zoom is a fantastic tool that helps bridge that gap, though. Okay, so then what happened after that? I'm curious. How did your journey evolve going forward?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because the seed was planted way before. I would say about oh, like 4 or 5 years prior to that. I had I was told about the book Rich Dad Poor Dad and Think and Grow Rich and learned about Robert Kiyosaki. So I had attended one of his events in Kitchener. Um, but really, I didn't think I was in any financial way able to invest in property. So it wasn't until me and my now husband had moved out to Calgary, and it was the fact that I had brought this one condo into the relationship in Kitchener, and my husband actually owned a condo in Calgary. So we each brought a property into the relationship. And living there, our regular life, working away, my mother-in-law had mentioned this TV show called Income Property. So we were kind of hooked on the TV show, and then we heard that Scott McGilvery was coming to Calgary. Actually, Calgary was already sold out the event, so we ended up going to Edmonton to attend his event, and we ended up joining Keyspire in 2015. So that was basically, we were a year and a half or so in, but that was a big game changer for us because that really taught
Yeah.
us about the systems and the processes and set us up with a team. And funnily enough, this was, as I said, like late 2015, beginning 2016. Being in Alberta, we were told the best place to invest is southwestern Ontario, whereas now everybody is going the opposite way. So what did we end up doing is we were looking for property in Kitchener because we said, well, we are familiar with Kitchener, it makes sense. And
Yeah.
and we also had learned that we could use HELOCs on our condos. And, we were raised pretty conservatively to always, whenever we had a chunk of money, put it towards the mortgage, pay down the debt, which in this event was really beneficial because we each had good amounts of equity in our properties. So with the help of Keyspire back then, setting us up with a team in Kitchener, we ended up buying a fourplex in downtown Kitchener with a HELOC from one condo, and then from the HELOC from the other condo, we bought a bungalow in Grove and did a duplex conversion on that. So that was all beginning of 2016. So within 3 months or so of joining Keyspire, we had the first property anyways under the belt, and within 6 months, the second property. So we went from essentially 2 condos to 8 units pretty quickly.
Big jump, big jump. So they sort of they showed you, hey, you have equity that you're sitting on here that you can actually access and just blow your portfolio up. That's wow. Okay, so you took on, now you have 8 units. So you go from two
Yeah.
units to managing 8 units. Of course, you need to dial things in now because as you scale up, you need to create more efficiencies. Were there any systems or processes that you then put into place to make managing your properties more efficiently, and how did that evolve?
Yeah. So what happened is, I should also mention that I was at that time pregnant with my first daughter. And we had as a goal to raise our own kids and not just send them off to daycare while we work all day long, right? So that was basically our
Yes.
why. And that's why we acted so quickly, because we saw the benefit in the passive income and the cash flow to help us supplement incomes and be able to be home with our kids. But I'm also mentioning that because of our daughter, we ended up moving back to Ontario. So initially, we bought the property sight unseen. We just had the team set up in Ontario, and we did fly in to go with a home inspection and just to have a look at the property then. But did
Yes.
all the paperwork, everything from Alberta, and then the fourplex was already tenanted, so we basically just took over the tenants. We ended up hiring a property manager that we noticed later was not the right property manager, so not a good reason to move back to Ontario, and we just ended up taking the management into our own hands. But really, what helped us was being Keyspire members at the time and just learning about the processes. And another important factor that I came along was really joining all the Facebook groups, right, on investors, landlords. Back then, there was a paralegal in the area called Harry Fine. He had a landlord package with all the documents you need. So really knowing to have good screening questions for the tenants, making sure you call the references, do the credit check, income proof, etc. And then also, when it comes to the lease agreement, really have a solid lease, have all the appendixes with that, and just have a solid process that way.
Absolutely. It's if you can put in that work up front, you save yourself all the headaches down the line. Now, I'm really curious, given your experience on outsourcing the property management, looking back at that, for anyone listening that's like, Stephanie, I'm not really interested in managing it myself. What are potentially some questions that I should be asking property managers that I'm screening to actually manage my properties so that I don't get myself in a similar situation that you were in?
I would really make sure you ask about their experience, right? How long have they been doing this? And also get references on the property manager to see what other clients have experiences with them, what are their experiences. Not just to how the property is managed, but also how the tenants are taken care of, how the property is taken care of, and really importantly too, their financial structure, right? Because normally with the property management, you allow them to go up to a certain amount for repairs and maintenance without having to come back to you for approval. So being first-time landlords back then really, or investor landlords, not knowing what's normal, and we were out of province, as I said. It was just like, oh, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. And we just thought, okay, it all has to be done. But then we were faced with all these bids, right? Whereas self-managing, I'm a lot more diligent and aware of what really needs to be fixed, what is a must be fixed, what is a nice to be fixed but could be pushed to next year, and what's a tenant asked that would be great for a tenant but is not necessary at all, right? And is nothing that's included in the lease.
100%, because ultimately, their goals are a little bit differently aligned to your goals as the property owner. So it's your money that's being spent, and no one spends your money better than you.
Well, that's exactly what it is, right? And so that was the one thing that really came at us financially. And the other thing was this property manager was referred to us by another Keyspire member, right? Again, we were out of province. We had never met that person in person. And it ended up being somebody who wanted to spend more time with his kids, but it was not really an expert in property management. So really pre-screen anyone on your team. It doesn't matter if it's your property manager, your realtor, contractors, and make sure they are a good fit and their goals align with really how you want to manage your property.
100%. Okay, so just to make sure we got this straight, you guys have the 2 apartments. You now have the fourplex. How did things progress from there?
Yeah, so from there we ended up moving back to Grove. We were kind of we ended up moving back to Toronto first and then ended up moving to Grove later. But anyways, we moved back to Ontario, which made it much easier for us to manage the property. So the fourplex in Kitchener was rented, but then we started the process of the duplex conversion. So the upstairs, we got the house at a really good price, because if you think back to 2016 prices, the cash flow was amazing. Even as is, it would have cash flows. But we didn't bother doing much renovation on the upstairs. It was a bungalow. It was still not quite grandma style, but really similar to that with a little bit of paint, right? So pretty original, but it was livable. So for us, it was just important to get the occupancy for the upstairs unit from the city. So we made sure we had that as soon as possible, that we could still get some rental income in while we were renovating the downstairs. And we ended up renting the upstairs to students, so they were okay with having the work going on downstairs. And that just really helped us to get that managed, because we didn't do any work ourselves. We had a contracting company in to really take over everything when it came to the basement apartment and the construction. So we dropped by every couple of months to just see what the progress was like. But again, in any renovation, there's something that comes up that's unexpected, where the rentals take longer, right? So you just always have to budget for those events as well.
100%. Now, for the I want to say Albertan investors, I know a lot of them refer to it as just a basement suite, and when I speak to people like in Ontario, they call that a duplex. So just for everyone listening, so that there's no confusion, it's that up down duplex. You know, it's the unit upstairs, the unit downstairs. Now, curious, what are some factors that influence the choice to go ahead, buy a bungalow and suite out the basement?
So back then, I want to say in our market, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge Grove, it still did make sense. So really it was looking for a property that had a side entrance, so separate entrance, and bungalows are the perfect choice because your square footage in the basement is the same as upstairs.
Yes.
So you have the perfect living space right there. And then people went as far as separating hydro. We didn't end up doing that. We just have everything on 1 meter, just because it was the quickest and easiest way to do the reno. We also did not, it was the first duplex conversion we did, so we kept the expenses as low as possible. We didn't do much soundproofing, whereas we've done another one since, and we did the best soundproofing options we could do. So you learn definitely from your mistakes as you go on and progress in this journey. But we just needed a quick turnaround to have the money come in.
Okay, so sort of the motivation behind going that strategy was, what were you guys looking to do a BRRRR? Were you looking to pull your capital back out? Or was it just we want to maximize cash flow? So this.
No, we just wanted to maximize cash flow. We didn't even know about all these strategies. We just went for a straight buy and hold. And then, lucky as we were here in Ontario, the property values had risen significantly. So as we did our refinance after 5 years, we had a lot of equity in the property. And that's when we really started taking out money on HELOCs, and it just spiraled from there.
100%. So, okay, so you got that first duplex conversion, and then you guys just kept adding to it, and you're like, okay, well, this is a nice strategy. We can get properties for lower value. We can go in, we can force the value up. We can add in another unit. Yeah. We can then increase our monthly income and the monthly performance of the property. Let's just keep copying and pasting this method. How do things progress from there?
Yeah, it progressed quite nicely, and something that we have always done, we have always kind of thought outside the box to see how can we really increase our income. So even going back to the property in Kitchener, we we just had regular washer and dryer in the laundry room, but instead of installing coin operated and having people break in, we opting to only give a key to tenants who would pay us $35 a month. It was based on 2 loads a week. So that just gave us additional income. We we were lucky at that property that it was 4 units, 3 tenants had cars, but there was a huge parking lot in the back. There was basically no backyard, but there was 7 parking spots, and we added another 7 on. So we ended up having 15 spots downtown Kitchener. So we rented out the spots to people working downtown for back then $90 a spot, right? So just thinking, what can you do to increase your income? And same with this duplex conversion in Grove, we ended up putting solar panels on the roof because back then we still qualified for the microgrid program. So it was a little bit of an investment up front, but now we had like an additional $300 in cash flow every single month from just having the solar panels on the roof. So just really trying to maximize cash flow on every single property we had.
Yeah, I love the creativity. You know, that's what it comes down to oftentimes, is how creative can you be and how can you find the opportunities. Now, question for you. You know, you've done a few of these. What are some typical things you look for the ideal property? Now, you've already alluded to some of them, right? Like a bungalow, it gives you the most amount of space in your basement, right? So you get the biggest footprint. You know, hopefully the layout's not too bad in terms of the mechanicals and where that's positioned. And then ideally, you know, you have that separate entrance. So what are some things that you look for when you buying a property, looking to do that conversion? And then what are some things that you've learned given the conversions that you've done, and you've alluded to some of these already, that you now sort of, that are like no-brainers? You know, maybe that's like ensuring that you are trying to dampen the noise transfer between units as much as possible. You know, are there any of those other golden nuggets that you can drop for the audience?
I think it's really trying to think of number one, always the income, as I already said, to increase that in any way you can. So another thing that we did was in-suite laundry, dishwashers, right? Because with that, number one, you can charge higher rents, but number two, you attract good tenants, right? So it's always going back to, you know, it's the last thing you want to do is have to go through the eviction process or have non-payment tenants or damages, which I have gone through too. It's part of being in this industry. But really trying to think of your tenant profile before you even post the ad or do your renovation, and then target specifically to them.
100%. I couldn't agree more on that, though. The tenant profile, you know, like so many investors that I help, like I'm like, that's kind of the starting point. You know, before you even buy, what's the tenant profile that you go in for? Like, if you can know your tenant profile, it makes everything else a whole lot easier. You know, who are you ideally looking to rent this out to? Because that dictates the location. You know, that dictates the property type, the finishes, everything. No, I love that. So yes, I'll let you continue there. I feel like I cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's all good. So the other thing that we have done, for example, is here in Grove, we bought a townhouse in a student complex. Now, I have never done student rental per se, other than this one time where we had to rent to students to just get through the renovation. It's just not something I'm interested in, dealing with all those phone calls about lost keys, etc., and the damages. But again, being creative. So this townhouse complex does not allow Airbnb, and I didn't want to do with students. So back before midterm rental was even a thing, I equipped this townhouse like an Airbnb, including the linens, towels, you know, cutlery, dishes, everything. And I just did, I want to say midterm rental. So I always did monthly rentals. So I have a regular lease agreement, Ontario standard lease, just from a month-to-month standpoint. But the tenants I'm attracting are, number one, they know they're not going to be there forever. So even if there's noise from students, it does not really bother them. And there's always, even when I'm bringing these tenants in, an exit strategy, right? I know they are just here because they are a professor at the university, or they are a newcomer just looking to buy a house or figure out where they want to live. families where their own home is under renovation, or even companies renting because they have a project going on and they need a place for a couple of months for employees, right? So it's really high quality tenants, and there's always an exit plan where I know, okay, they're gonna, after a couple of months, they're gonna move on, and the property is always in great shape.
Okay, yeah, and that's something that I want to still touch on is, you mean you have experience with the, the short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, and long-term rentals. So I want to highlight some of the differences between them, the challenges you face. But question that I have for you, when it comes to duplexes or properties with basement suites, one of the biggest things that people don't see when you look at the pro forma is the tenant turnover, right? You tend to have a lot more issues between upstairs, downstairs tenants than you typically would if this was just a single family unit, or if it was just a condo or a townhouse with one tenant in, right? Because of the noise transfer, or potentially one tenant having a dog and not cleaning up after them, or tons and tons of potential disputes happen in there. But oftentimes the turnover, especially like maybe in the basement suites, tend to be higher. How was your experience with this, firstly, and was there anything that you found that you could do to sort of lengthen the longevity of your tenants?
So I should mention that usually for the single family properties, if it's a regular single family long-term rental, even in the duplex I have, the tenants have been there for a couple of years. To a point where you actually do want tenant turnover every couple of years so that you can bring the rent up to market rent, because we are limited to how much we can increase the rent year over year.
The rent caps, yeah.
So I would think more of there is the least amount of maintenance from my perspective when it comes to these single family homes, longer term rentals, because usually the tenants, even though the landlord is responsible for lawn care and snow removal, the tenant doesn't want me to show up every day at their driveway and shovel the driveway, right? So we found in general that those properties really self-manage themselves between the tenants, and we just get calls when there's any bigger issues. That's really the experience I have there. Now the midterm, because it is furnished, I find there's a little bit more turnover, because as I said, people are coming in already knowing that they would stay kind of for a couple months. And also from the perspective of finding a new tenant, it takes usually a little bit longer for me to fill those units, because it's a more, you don't have as much target group to target when you are looking for a furnished rental, especially. Oftentimes you get the long-term tenants who are interested, who said, oh, can you take all the furniture out? And I said, no, sorry, that's not how it works, right? So, and then, as I said, we also had experience with Airbnb, whereas we have just turned our Airbnb into a midterm rental as well, because mainly in Grove, where we are, the Airbnb licensing, there's been talks about it coming into effect, and fees with that as well. So we just found that we are not in a super tourist area, and we cannot charge the upside on an Airbnb. Plus, there's been a lot more Airbnbs that popped up over the last couple of years. So there's not enough spread for us to really justify it having as a short-term rental, where there's a lot more on hand. It's more like a hospitality business almost, right? Like on-hand management. You have to be available if there's issues. You have to have the cleaner organized, etc. So it, we just decided to get out of that and turn it into a midterm rental and have it rented for a couple months at a time. So that seems to be working.
Okay, I love these podcast episodes, and it also it highlights things that you never think of. Like, for example, when you think of in Alberta, well, you don't have the caps on rent increases, right? So an ideal tenant for you is a tenant that's going to stay there for the long haul, where you don't have to paint and do everything every time a tenant moves out, and then have those couple of weeks doing tenant screenings, having those vacancies. You ideally want a tenant that's going to stay as long as they can. But in other places where you have the caps and you want to get things up to market rent, well, you're kind of hoping for the tenant turnover, right? So I guess it really depends where you invest in. But that's a fantastic point that I wasn't thinking of. Now, you kind of highlighted this already, but between, managing the mix of short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, and of course the short-term rentals having their fair fair share of issues depending where you invest in, and but the short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, long-term rental properties, how were you, when you were still in the short-term rental space at least, how do you structure the operations to maintain efficiency across those different strategies? Because each one has their pros, their cons, you know what I mean? Do you mind highlighting some pros and cons between each strategy and what you found works for you? Now, you kind of touched on this slightly already, but just between the short-term, mid-term, and long-term, when deciding these are the pros, but maybe it makes more sense to switch to a midterm, like you mentioned.
Yeah, so I would say just talking about the pros, obviously with a short-term rental, the Residential Tenancy Act does not apply, right? So I think that's a big benefit, that you don't end up staying with somebody as a not just a tenant, but potentially a bad tenant, right? Or any issues that could arise from that. And I think that was a big driver here in Ontario, why a lot of people opted for Airbnb, to just avoid having to deal with the Residential Tenancy Act, the Landlord-Tenant Board, and to be fair, all the delays with that too, right? Like delays to even get a hearing, etc. Because our law here compared to Alberta is so lopsided and geared really to be tenant friendly over landlord friendly.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That's a fantastic point. Now, comparing midterm rentals to long-term rentals, I know you already mentioned this, is the market share for midterm rentals can be a little bit trickier, right? Versus the long-term rentals. Now, on the flip side is with the midterm rentals, maybe you have less control of the vacancy or the turnover and when that happens potentially, and if it's at an inconvenient time of the year kind of thing. What are some potential not problems, but challenges on the midterm rental side versus the long-term rental? And what are some factors that you sort of considering when you sort of deciding between, maybe it would just make sense to get a long-term tenant in there, get the furniture out, get a long-term tenant in, leave it be, versus, hey, this property, maybe it actually makes sense to switch it from a long-term to a midterm. Let's get some furniture in and let's switch it over. What are some factors that you consider there?
Yeah, I would definitely say with a midterm rental, because it is furnished too. Like again, you have a tenant that's only going to stay for a couple months. You have more turnover, and every time you turn somebody over, because it is more or less equipped like an Airbnb, you also have to potentially replace certain furniture items, linens, etc. So there is that extra cost associated with it, beside regular repair and maintenance that you would do on a long-term rental when it comes to fresh paint or, fixing or upgrading appliances, etc., as need be. But that's definitely something to consider, that you're kind of in between the Airbnb and the long-term rental, and that you still, even though you're not short-term, you are more, and you're not having the full hospitality aspect with a midterm rental, but you're still providing a fully equipped house where somebody who's moving into this is almost expecting it to be Airbnb-like.
Yes, that makes sense. Now, I'm curious, I know you mentioned on the one property you switched it over, but have you ever, tested the different rental strategies on the exact same property? And like, what insights did you gain from comparing, their performance between the different strategies?
So we did have one that was actually this one duplex conversion I had mentioned in the basement. We had it as an Airbnb. Then at some point we had switched, well, not really to a midterm rental. There was just straight from, we stopped doing Airbnb and converted it to a furnished long-term rental, whereas now over the years, more and more of the furniture has moved out of the property because the tenants have been there for some time and they just wanted their own items in there. So we've been good with that. But again, then you have a long-term tenant who potentially, especially if they moved in at a time where rents were a lot lower than what they are now, they are staying, and they are staying for a long time. So you don't have the benefit that you would have with a midterm rental where, you know, somebody is moving on and you can get the rent back up to where it should be.
Yes, you could always just have those market rents and you can just keep them on par. What has your experience been, though, with the vacancies on the midterm rental?
You know, my philosophy ever since we had to have this property management experience back then and had to go through an eviction process for damages and non-payment, etc. I'm always opting for having a property vacant if it has to be 1 or 2 months, and finding the right tenant. It's much
100%.
cheaper in the end having a property sit vacant for a little bit than having somebody not pay, having to hire a paralegal, having to cause damages and fix them, which can amount to, I think back then the one issue cost us about 20 grand, right? So
Yeah, that's a very, very, very valid point. Absolutely. Rather have it sit vacant for a little, get the right tenant in there. You have less headaches. The management is a whole lot easier. You actually enjoy being an investor. Like, if you speak to people are like, no, real estate is terrible. And oftentimes the experience that they had with the tenants that they had, and a lot of it can be avoided with, you know, good screening. You know, you can cut off most of your problems, not all of them, but most of the problems by just, you know, really, really screening well. Now, I'm curious, and of course, this is market specific as well. Like we can make out like your decisions between the different strategies is again based on market, right? Based on, you know, wanting to maintain rents as close to market rents as possible. You know, all of these things. But just in your experience, though, having been exposed to all these different strategies, which strategy do you believe offers the best scalability for your portfolio, and why?
So I'm definitely on the team of multifamily. So again, we've personally always invested in buy and hold, and I'm still a strong believer in that, given the fact that we will have assets in the end to pass down to our kids. Plus, once the tenants have paid off the mortgages for us, we will have a good cash flow amount coming in every month in our retirement. So that's the strategy we have picked. I know there are a lot of other strategies out there when it comes to conversions these days, or infill development, especially now with being 4 units allowed per lot in Kitchener and soon in Grove as well, right? So there is potential there. But from my personal experience investing and making the transition to multifamily, like we invest in 5+ units. So we have like a 9-plex and we also have a 12-plex. So just making that jump made it so much easier to not just manage the property because you really have everything under one roof. You also are a lot less volatile when it comes to any discrepancies, because if you have a vacancy, it does not affect you as much compared to a duplex, etc. Right? So that's really been one of the strategies we leaned into a lot, and one that I still like to recommend to investors here, because even though it does not necessarily make sense in the market we are in, being straight in like the cities, the Tri-Cities or in Grove, but going out as soon as you leave the city and you go, you know, a couple townships down west, away from Toronto, I should point out, there's cash flow to be found, right? And the property prices are also a lot more affordable. Like back when we transitioned into these multifamily properties, because we had personally hit the financing wall and couldn't personally qualify for additional mortgages, we needed to tap into commercial loans where the property would qualify itself. we were faced with the option of buying a 6-plex in Kitchener or buying a 12-plex an hour outside of Kitchener. Whereas we are really thankful now that we opted for the 12-plex. Now, being in smaller towns, there are other challenges, just industry-wise, because there's not as much employment out there. Oftentimes, you have one big employer, and half your building is, or sometimes even more, is employed at this one employer, right? So there's other challenges you are facing, but the rents have come up significantly in those markets as well. So just from looking at the ratio of purchase price and getting into these deals compared to the rent amount, it makes much more sense. And for us, it's always been cash flow is king, and really only invest in something that's cash flowing from day one. Don't speculate.
I'm very glad that you highlighted that fact. Is as you start moving out to smaller marketplaces, smaller communities, there is that sort of increase potential risk, because yes, a lot of the tenants are relying on like these bigger employers, and it's always a question if something changes and there's a market shift and someone shuts down, what happens on the vacancy side. Now, curious for you, what do you find that sweet spot is in terms of like even population? Like, okay, we won't go smaller than this. Like, this is the ideal sweet spot where we can still find cash flow, but I'm okay with the potential risks of being in a smaller marketplace.
So I think our population is not just what you are personally comfortable with as an investor, but it's also really important to connect with the lenders here, because there are different lending requirements, and lenders oftentimes would not consider properties outside a certain radius from a bigger city of at least 50,000 people. So that's really something that I want to highlight, because you have to make sure you can get proper financing as well. Personally, we've always made sure, even this one town we are in only has a population of 5,000-6,000 people, but there has been growth. So we know it's still, as I said, within a 1-hour drive to Kitchener to grow. So there are people commuting. And because of the prices and the increases in home prices over the last couple of years, because Toronto has become so unaffordable for many and people were moving west, we've seen that even here in Grove. A lot of people moved from Toronto to Grove because Grove was the greatest city to live at some point here. But then Grove became unaffordable for Grove residents, right? So we saw them moving out west, and that was just a push that was going on. So those smaller communities that we are investing in actually have a lot of like home developments going on as we speak, and people are moving that way.
I love that you highlighted that. I was going to mention that is the path of progress. If you can accurately predict where that path of progress is, you get into properties at a much lower price point. Now, predicting the timeline is purely speculation. But if you can see that the inflow of population is far outweighing the outflow, and you could sort of just see where the growth is headed, and you can buy in the path of progress, well, there's a lot of upside to be made there. I love that we've highlighted on a broad spectrum of different property types, on different, different rental terms and different strategies. Looking at your entire journey from accidental landlord to managing a diverse portfolio, what's been the biggest lesson that stands out that you've learned about yourself?
The biggest lesson is it comes down to goal setting and, like, honestly, vision boarding and knowing your why. Because again, our why when we started was to be able to raise our kids and be home for them and not to have to send them to daycare every day.
Yes.
But that is, I think, the strongest push. And then also try to envision yourself 10 years down the road and make a plan where you want to be. I know when we first started out, we had a goal of making 10,000 in rental income every single month, which was back then a huge number to us, right? But just knowing how much money you need to live and just slowly, eating the elephant one bite at a time, right? Like real estate is a long-term game.
100%.
And you have to understand that there is no, everybody's posting about real estate investing and it's the greatest thing to do and you're rich by tomorrow. That's not how it works, right? So really it's a long-term game, but if you can just add a property at the time, we have been, compared to other investors who've gotten into it a couple of years ago or 2-3 years ago now, there's a lot of people who scaled really fast, but then they've also over leveraged in the current environment we are in. And we personally knew that we wanted a solid portfolio. We didn't take on any partners. We did everything ourselves. And we just kind of knew how much we wanted for our retirement and how much income we need. And we just added about one property per year, or did a duplex conversion a year, just adding slowly and stabilizing as you go. So we always, as we added a property, we would stabilize it, make sure it runs smoothly, then go to the next, so that nothing is really falling through the crack.
I love that you highlighted that, because it is so true. And I think with social media, being the blessing that it is, there can also be, that sense of FOMO, that other people are growing way quicker than I am. And it's so tough to really, really know. Just by hearing how many doors someone has does not give you a clear indication of how healthy their portfolio is and, what their net worth even is, so I love that you highlighted that, because it absolutely is a marathon. And if you treat it like a sprint, chances are you're not going to make it to the finish line. You're going to over-leverage yourself and you're going to burn and crash somewhere. So I really love that you highlighted that, because ultimately it does come down to your personal individual goals. And there's no right or wrong. And the finish line for everybody is completely different. So the fact that you should be working towards your own goals and not someone else's goals, or comparing yourself to someone else's quote unquote progress, it's fantastic advice. Now, this leads into like the next segment, and you've set the bar high for yourself, so hopefully we can keep this going. So I call this segment Time Capsule. So let's imagine that you stumbled across a time machine that you can travel back and forth in time, but of course you can't change anything. All you can do is give and receive advice from your younger or older self. So first, let's go back to when you were 18 years old. What advice would you give your younger self with the knowledge you have now? Now, this can be within business, this can be investing, personal life, familial, or a combination of it all. It doesn't really matter. What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
It's funny because I already give my 2 little kids this advice too, but it's really follow your dream and your passion, because I think that's going to get you a lot further if you enjoy what you're doing on a daily basis, compared to just working at a job for money's sake and not enjoying what you do. And that ties into start investing as soon as you can. Get advice if you need to from somebody, but just having your money work for you as early as you can. My 2 little kids, they are both under 10 years old, and they get interest every single month from the mommy and daddy bank. And they learn about interest and compounding interest, because the sooner we start investing, the better off we will be, right? So that would be 100%. The biggest advice I have. And secondly, with following your passion, it just you don't always need to get a university degree. I'm saying this because I personally do not have one. Nobody would know these days. But I don't have one because the system in Germany where I grew up works differently. It does not matter, but what's on paper is not always as important. As an entrepreneur, you can make a lot more money than some people who spend a lot of money on their education and then need to pay back those loans, right?
100%. That was okay. So you followed through. You set the bar high, but you followed through. I completely agree with you. Firstly, is if you look back to just like a generation or so ago, you'd see parents tell their kids like, get off the video games and work hard and go to university, go to college. And if you look now, there are people who are making a killing playing video games, literally playing games online where your parents told you stop doing this. It's a crazy example, but I think it holds true for any industry and any field. Is if you're passionate about something, you'll rise to the top and you can then be the best of the best and you can be successful at what you're doing. But if you're not passionate about something and you're just following it purely because it's a good career or it's a good field to be in, how good are you going to be? Are you really going to be successful at what you do? And ultimately, are you going to be happy and fulfilled at what you do? And I completely agree with it. University, college is not a requirement anymore. Maybe it used to be years ago, but not anymore unless you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, and your industry requires that education. Outside of that, you don't need to go to university to be successful. Times are changing, and so I love that you highlighted that. Now I'm curious because now we're going to switch it up. We're going to go ahead to your 80th birthday. What advice do you imagine that your future self would offer you at your present age?
Good question. To be honest, maybe get out of the real estate game. No, just I think the advice would pretty much be the same, right? Really outlining your life and seeing how you want to live, and try to live, really take in the moment, because we see people. I hope I'm going to be 80 one day, but we don't know anymore these days, right? There's so many diseases, people passing away earlier, etc., that I think we don't have the luxury anymore to wait until the official retirement age of 65 or 67 to then enjoy our life, because we don't know where our health is going to be. So really the advice I would give myself right now would be to do what's truly important to me now, and spend the money. Don't waste money, but if something is really of value to you, it doesn't matter if it's traveling or learning another skill or whatever it might be, right? Invest in yourself, I should say. And and I wouldn't really give myself the advice to get out of real estate, but we in the environment we are in, truly it's starting to pay off debt, right? Be really careful that you don't over leverage, so that you really can hold on to the assets you have and you're not forced to offloading at a time when you don't want to. So just being 100%. Really mindful of where you keep your money right now.
100%. And I think that goes back to tying into like your why. Why are you doing this? And, the upside of leveraging more and scaling up even further just to push it. Is that worth the potential downside? And, does that get you closer to your goal, or is that just risking the end goal for you at the end of the day? And, you're right. The whole reason why a lot of people get into real estate is for like the time freedom and just the freedom in general, because it's not guaranteed that you're going to live until your retired age. It's just not guaranteed. So the sooner that you can get to living a fulfilled life, to having more freedom to do things that fill you up and increasing your skills. I love that you mentioned that, because that's always something we should be striving to do no matter how old we are, is just leveling up continuously. That's fantastic. No, that's fantastic. Now, let's dive into our rapid fire round. So just answer with the first thing that comes to mind and have fun with it. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Perfect. What's the one tool or system you couldn't live without in your business?
Tenant screening.
Love it. That's a fantastic answer. If you could only check one metric before buying a property, which would it be?
The current rental income and the potential rental income.
Okay, rental income. Love that. What's your personal golden rule of real estate investing? I think I kind of know this one already.
I think it goes back down to really the tenant screening.
I knew it. Which is riskier, underestimating costs or overestimating rents?
That's a tricky one.
It is. It's not meant to be easy.
I think especially in Ontario too, because if you overestimate your rents and they end up, you end up inheriting tenants, or you just don't get the rent you thought you would get, and then you're limited to increasing the rent only by what's allowed by the guideline. It's a slow process to actually get the rents up. Whereas expenses, I find there's always ways to tweak if you have to, plus getting multiple quotes in. If you know, God forbid, if you have to doing some work yourself to lower your expenses. So
I love that, because yes, you're right. That answer is dependent on where you invest in. Like, is it easier to tweak the rental income side or easier to tweak the expenses side, right? I love that. I love that. Oh man, Stephanie, this has been amazing. I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey, your insights, your expertise with us today. Just quickly, for people listening now, I will leave all your information in the footnotes below, no matter which platform they're streaming on. But just for the people potentially driving, where's the best place for people to connect with you and learn more about you?
I think easiest is Instagram. So it's at Stephanie_Mycyk_real_estate. That's the easiest way. And then I usually take it off the platform as soon as I can. So that's when we can exchange phone numbers, emails, etc.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. And, to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a like, leave a review, and keep investing smartly. Thank you for tuning in to the Wealth Through Real Estate Show. If you want to learn how to turn distressed properties and ADUs into profitable investments, and you don't want to miss my episode with Saif Al-Sali. This is your host, Al Ray Noble, signing off.